On a winter night in Yorkshire, a door closes on mercy and a pen seals a fate. In a vicarage parlour lit by a thin fire, Count Nathaniel Hargrave signs a cold bargain. A marriage purchased, a heart armoured against regret. Across from him stands Eleanor Whitfield, calm, unadorned, carrying dignity like a lantern. Between ink and silence, something trembles. A secret about to surface. A past betrayal stalking the room. An impossible choice whispering between duty and desire. When the wedding night arrives, innocence shatters certainty, and nothing, not pride nor title, will remain untouched. Before we begin, share where you're listening from and tell me what draws you most to period romances: redemption, slow burn longing, or scandal. Yorkshire, England. Winter of 1812. The wind howled low against the stone walls of the vicarage, shaking the naked branches of the elms and rattling the windows with a bitter chill that seemed to echo the silence in the small parlour. The hearth burned low, casting long shadows upon the modest furniture. A worn carpet muffled the hesitant footsteps of Eleanor Whitfield as she stood by the door, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. The fabric of her plain dove-grey gown gathered gently beneath her fingers. She did not cry. She had not cried when her father told her of the arrangement. She had not cried when he admitted the parish accounts were too deep in debt to recover. And she would not cry now, not in front of the man who had come to buy her future with ink, seal, and gold. Count Nathaniel Hargrave stood tall by the window, his back straight, posture rigid, shoulders wrapped in a dark wool overcoat still glistening faintly with melted snow. His storm-grey eyes scanned the countryside beyond the glass, unmoved by the winter landscape or the quiet tension that filled the room. Beside him, Reverend Thomas Whitfield bent over the writing desk, his hand trembling as he signed the contract. "I trust the terms are acceptable," the Count said, his voice low and unfeeling like a verdict already spoken. "They are," the Reverend replied, barely above a whisper, "though I sign it with a heavy heart." Nathaniel turned slowly. His gaze fell on Eleanor, and for the briefest second, something flickered behind his eyes, curiosity perhaps, or doubt, but it vanished like breath on glass. "You will be treated with respect," he said to her. "You will want for nothing, except choice," she replied quietly. Her voice surprised him, as did the steady strength behind it. She was not trembling, nor shrinking, nor pleading. She stood before him like a portrait carved of light and shadow, her chestnut hair neatly braided, her eyes, hazel and calm, meeting his without flinching. By nightfall, the marriage was done. At Hargrave Manor, the ceremony passed with the discretion Nathaniel had demanded. Only the housekeeper, Mrs. Beatrice Hargrave, and the steward were present to witness the union. No music, no flowers, no joy, just a fire in the grand hall, a pair of golden rings, and a few muttered words between strangers bound by law. Eleanor's hands were gloved in grey wool. She did not wear pearls or lace, only the simple cross her mother had once worn, and the heavy silence of sacrifice. When she whispered her vows, her voice did not tremble. But Nathaniel's hand, when it brushed hers to place the ring, was colder than the wind outside. He had told himself this would be clean, practical, a union to secure his title, protect his estate, and silence the inquiries of meddling peers. She was the daughter of a clergyman. She would know humility. She would know her place. He would not have to pretend or feel or bleed again. And yet, as the servants disappeared down the stone corridor and the door closed behind them, they stood alone in the chamber, prepared for their wedding night. The fire burned softly in the hearth, throwing amber light across the carved oak bed, the velvet drapes, the braided rug. Eleanor did not approach him. She did not lower her eyes. She stood by the window, gazing into the snow-covered night, her hands still calmly folded. Nathaniel removed his gloves, unfastened his coat. He did not speak. At last, she turned to face him. "I know what is expected," she said with quiet clarity, "and I will not resist you. but I ask only for kindness." The room grew still. Something inside him recoiled, because in her words he did not hear seduction or manipulation, but honesty, vulnerability, stripped of all pretense. A young woman who had walked willingly into the fire to save her family. He stepped forward, but as his hand reached for the tie of her shawl, his breath caught. Her pulse was racing, and suddenly he knew she was untouched. His hand fell away as if burned. She said nothing, only stood there, awaiting whatever his next gesture might be. Not with fear, but with acceptance. That broke him more than innocence. Nathaniel stepped back. The air between them trembled. The shadows swelled around the fire. "You will have your own chamber," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "I will not touch you, not tonight, not unless you ever ask me to." Eleanor blinked. The slightest breath escaped her lips, but she gave no answer. He turned, walked to the door and opened it. "I am not a cruel man," he added, still facing the corridor, "but I've forgotten what it means to be gentle. Forgive me." Then he was gone, and Eleanor, alone now in the room, meant to bind their fates, walked to the fire, unfastened her shawl, and sat in silence. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the manor, something else had begun. Not a marriage of convenience, but a collision of souls. One hardened by betrayal, the other unbroken by sacrifice. And though they did not yet know it, neither would remain untouched for long. The first full day, as Countess Hargrave dawned beneath a sky of pale ash and slow-moving clouds. Snow clung stubbornly to the black slates of the manor's roof, melting only where chimneys breathed warmth into the morning cold. The carriage that bore Eleanor from her father's modest vicarage to Hargrave Manor creaked along the icy path, the wheels pressing dark, wet grooves into the frostbitten earth. Eleanor sat still inside, hands folded tightly over her lap, the motionless fingers hidden beneath kid gloves still new and stiff. Her dove-grey cloak was fastened at the neck, her head wrapped in a bonnet of dark wool tied beneath her chin. There were no ribbons, no feathers, no trimmings, only a single brooch, her mother's, and the quiet steel in her posture. She had not spoken since the driver tipped his hat and began the long ascent to the manor gates. There was nothing to say. Hargrave Manor loomed in the distance, its stone facade rising like a fortress carved from the very hillside. Towers clawed at the sky. Ivy choked the outer walls. The windows, tall, narrow, unblinking, reflected the grey of winter without mercy. It did not feel like a home. It felt like judgment. As the carriage reached the great circular drive, the main door opened with a moan that echoed down the front steps. A woman in dark skirts and a high-collared shawl stepped forward, her arms crossed and her gaze sharp as flint. Her hair, coiled tightly beneath a lace cap, was silver and stern. Eleanor stepped down from the carriage, her boots meeting the stone with a quiet firmness. Before she could adjust her cloak or glance around at the sea of watching windows, the older woman approached. "You're smaller than I imagined," the woman said, and then softening, "but braver, I think." "I am Eleanor Hargrave," she answered, straightening her back. "I know who you are, child. I'm Beatrice Hargrave. I ran this house when your husband was still climbing trees, and I suspect I will keep running it long after we are both dust." She paused. "Come in. It's too cold for pride." Inside, the manor breathed in a long silence. Stone walls absorbed sound, thick tapestries muffled the air. Servants watched from shadowed alcoves, some curious, others cold, most silent. Eleanor caught a glimpse of a footman whispering behind gloved fingers. Another woman disappeared behind a heavy velvet curtain, but it was the steward who stepped forward next. He was tall, with a pale, narrow face and eyes like thinned ink. His black coat fit too tightly at the collar, and the way he held his ledger, pressed to his chest like a blade sheathed in paper, told her more than any welcome would have. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said without a bow, "we did not expect you until midday." "I came when I was ready," Eleanor replied, evenly. Mr. Alderton did not smile. Beatrice cleared her throat. "You'll want to see your rooms, but the Count left instructions." "What sort of instructions?" Eleanor asked. "That you were to be made comfortable. That your quarters would be the east wing, not the master's floor. That you were to be undisturbed." Beatrice's tone was neutral, but her eyes flicked with meaning. Eleanor nodded. She understood. The walls would separate them, as would the doors, as would everything else. Still, she followed Beatrice through the hallways, past painted portraits of brooding ancestors and hunting scenes forever frozen in oil. At the top of a carved staircase, they reached a tall wooden door, flanked by dark drapery and a brass candlestick. "Your rooms," Beatrice said, opening the door. "They were once Lady Helena's, his mother." The rooms were not cold. They were magnificent in their stillness. A writing desk sat before a frosted window. A wardrobe of polished walnut stood at attention in the corner. A low fire crackled in the hearth. The bed, canopied in pale damask, looked untouched for years. Eleanor crossed the room slowly and laid a hand upon the window pane. Outside, the hills were swallowed in snow, the stables half lost in the mist. She did not cry. She did not allow herself. "I wish I could say this house grows warmer with time," Beatrice said behind her, "but it doesn't. Not on its own. You will have to bring the warmth yourself." Eleanor turned. "Does the house resent me?" "No, but it remembers. Everything here remembers." The older woman stepped closer, lowered her voice. "And not everyone wants it to forget." That evening, Eleanor asked for writing materials and a list of the village's charitable accounts. Beatrice raised her brows. "Most new brides ask for silks," she said. "I'm not most brides." "I see that," the older woman said softly. Later in the library, she found Nathaniel. He sat by the fire, alone, a glass of something dark in his hand. His cravat had been loosened. The light played along the sharp edge of his cheekbone. A book lay unopened in his lap. He did not rise when she entered. "May I speak with you?" Eleanor asked. "You are not required to ask permission." "I am not asking from obligation," she said. "I am asking from respect." That made him look at her. "I wish to become involved in the charitable affairs of the estate, the poorhouses, the widows, the children in need of coal." Nathaniel blinked once. "Why?" "Because I would rather be of use than of ornament." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Most women would ask for ribbons. I don't need ribbons." A silence passed between them, weighted not by hostility, but by something far more difficult: curiosity and restraint. "Speak to Mrs. Hargrave," he said finally. "She'll give you what you need." Eleanor inclined her head and left the room without another word. The next morning, while walking the corridor outside the steward's office, Eleanor smelled smoke, a faint, acrid trace that didn't belong. She followed it, silent as a cat, down the hall. Behind a half-open door, she saw Mr. Alderton. The fireplace before him glowed. In his hands, a sealed envelope with Nathaniel's name on it, cream-colored, tied with a violet ribbon. Without hesitation, Alderton fed it to the flames. Eleanor watched as the ribbon curled black and the parchment flaked into ash. When she stepped away, she made no sound, but in her mind, a door had opened, and it would not be closed again. Something was hidden in this house, and Eleanor, with every breath, was becoming less a guest and more its keeper. The morning of the York Assembly arrived with sharp sunlight and a sky so pale it nearly vanished into the frost. Eleanor stood by the tall window of her bedchamber, watching as the mist lifted from the moors, and the carriage horses were harnessed below. Her fingers played absently with the edge of her woolen shawl, but her expression remained composed, almost serene. Mrs. Beatrice Hargrave entered without knocking, carrying a lacquered box wrapped in ribbon and quiet resolve. "You'll be seen tonight," she said, "and they will look for weakness in everything, your walk, your posture, the quality of your gloves." Eleanor turned, one brow gently raised. "And do you expect them to find it?" Beatrice gave a small, dry smile. "I expect them to try." Inside the box was a gown of midnight blue silk, its high empire waist delicately embroidered with silver thread in a pattern of climbing ivy. The sleeves were long, translucent, gathered at the wrists with small pearl buttons. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. Tasteful, restrained, the dress of a woman who knew she had no need to shout. Beatrice adjusted the bodice as Eleanor stood before the mirror. "Hold your head high. You are a Hargrave now, whether they believe it or not." "I am still the vicar's daughter," Eleanor murmured. "Then wear that as armor. There is no nobler title." By dusk, the Hargrave carriage rolled through the gates of York's Grand Assembly Hall, lanterns flickering against the darkening sky. The air crackled with anticipation. Coaches lined the snow-dusted street, and the scent of rosewater and coal smoke swirled in the winter air. Inside, the ballroom gleamed beneath 100 chandeliers. Crystals danced with candlelight. The floor shone like glass. Women in gowns of violet and scarlet glided between columns. Men in waistcoats and tails offered practiced bows and whispered judgments behind polished smiles. Eleanor entered on Nathaniel's arm. He looked every inch the Count, tall, composed, wrapped in a black tailcoat with a starched white cravat tied perfectly beneath his jaw. But there was a shadow in his gaze, a stiffness in his step that did not match the warmth of the room. He did not speak as they moved through the crowd, nor did he meet her eyes. Eleanor walked with dignity. She knew the eyes that followed her, the whispers that trailed behind her hemline like a second train. They called her upstart, charity bride, parson's daughter in silk, but she kept her chin lifted, her breath even. "Count Hargrave," a voice purred nearby. "How refreshing to see you among us again." Eleanor turned. Lady Margaret Ashcombe stood like a painting come to life, wrapped in deep garnet velvet, hair swept into black curls crowned with garnets to match. Her smile was radiant, her eyes unblinking. "Lady Ashcombe," Nathaniel replied, nodding. "And is this the Countess?" Margaret asked sweetly, turning her gaze upon Eleanor as if regarding a new piece of furniture. "She is," Nathaniel said, but his voice, though calm, lacked certainty. Margaret extended a gloved hand to Eleanor. "You're very brave to make your debut in York. I imagine it's all a bit overwhelming for someone so new to our world." "I imagine any room full of strangers can be overwhelming," Eleanor said, meeting her gaze directly. "Regardless of one's wardrobe." Margaret's smile froze at the corners. "Indeed." The orchestra began a quadrille. Margaret leaned in toward Nathaniel. "Do bring her to supper, won't you? It would be a pity to hide such an intriguing new addition to our circle." With a final glance, dismissive, almost triumphant, she drifted away in a flurry of perfume and silk. The evening wore on. Eleanor was introduced to a dozen names she would forget by morning, danced with 2 gentlemen who spoke only of hunting, and smiled through 100 carefully veiled insults. "Such an unusual accent, Lady Hargrave. What charmingly rustic manners you have. Your hands, so strong. Do you ride often?" But it was during the supper hour, under the carved ceiling of the refreshment room, that the cut came sharpest. Eleanor was reaching for a glass of Burgundy when Margaret approached. With perfect timing and theatrical carelessness, she turned, just as a footman passed behind her, and knocked the edge of the serving tray. The wine splashed across Eleanor's bodice, scarlet on blue. Gasps, laughter, quickly stifled. "Oh dear," Margaret said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there. You blend in so well, like a very well-dressed servant." The silence that followed was brutal. Eleanor stood still, her face expressionless. She did not reach for a napkin. She did not flinch. Slowly, she placed the glass down upon the table. Her eyes met Margaret's with steady fire. "No apology necessary," she said softly. "After all, anyone can spill." Then she turned and walked away, gracefully, without a word to Nathaniel. He had watched the entire exchange. He had said nothing, not out of cruelty, but out of paralysis. The moment had risen too fast, the room too full of eyes, and the old voice, "Be careful, they are always watching," had frozen his tongue. He found her again only hours later, back at Hargrave Manor. It was past midnight. The house was quiet. He had wandered the corridors, restless, uncertain, until he heard it, the low murmur of voices from the servants' quarters. Drawn by instinct, he followed the sound. In the dim light of the scullery, Eleanor sat on a bench beside a young maid, perhaps 16, who sobbed into her apron. Her hands were chapped from the cold. A shattered teacup lay on the floor. "I didn't mean to," the girl cried. "It just slipped, and the steward said he'd have me turned out." Eleanor wrapped the girl's hand gently in hers. "No one will turn you out for a broken cup," she said. "Not while I am here." The girl blinked up at her. "But he said—" "I said," Eleanor interrupted gently, "that you are not to be afraid. Everyone drops something sooner or later, even wine." The girl's eyes widened. Eleanor smiled, slow and real. "Clean this up, then go to bed. You've worked enough for one day." As she rose, she saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway. They did not speak, but something passed between them, a silence full of questions, and something else too. Something warm, aching, and deeply human. He watched her walk past him, her chin high despite the hour. Her gown was still stained from the wine, but she wore it like a banner. He had not defended her. But now, watching her comfort another with more grace than the entire assembly possessed, he realized she had not needed his defense. She had only needed his respect, and perhaps his heart would learn, in time, how to give it. Yorkshire lay wrapped in silence, the kind that only snow can bring. The sky above Hargrave Manor was heavy with clouds, swollen and low, pregnant with the storm yet to break. The air outside carried a sharpness that sliced through the lungs, and the trees stood motionless, as if bracing themselves for what would come. In the study, Nathaniel stood at the window with a glass of dark brandy in hand. His eyes narrowed on the hills beyond. The landscape was already losing color, dulled to hues of slate and ash. The wind had begun to change, first subtle, then rising with a growl that kissed the corners of the manor with a warning. Behind him, the fire snapped in the hearth. A letter from London lay unopened on his desk. It bore the unmistakable seal of Lady Margaret Ashcombe. He did not touch it. Far from the study, Eleanor was already lacing her boots, a heavy wool cloak fastened tight at her throat. The east wing was quiet as she moved through the corridor, a bundle of blankets pressed against her hip. In the servants' hall, Beatrice waited with baskets, one filled with bread, the other with coal, and small bottles of laudanum carefully wrapped in cloth. "They've gone without since Michaelmas," Beatrice muttered, adjusting her gloves. "If the storm worsens, we may not reach them tomorrow. And the Hammond boy, he's coughing blood." Eleanor nodded. "Then we go now." "Does he know?" Beatrice asked quietly. Eleanor did not need to ask whom she meant. "The Count has not asked after the tenants." "Nor after me," Beatrice snorted. "Then let him enjoy his brandy while others freeze." They departed through the side gate, two figures wrapped in dark cloaks, their shapes already disappearing into the veil of wind and white. The snow began as dust, then thickened into drifts that stung the cheeks and blurred the world. The path to the tenant cottages wound through fields and across a narrow stone bridge, now slick with ice. The wind whipped at their hoods, howled through hedgerows, tore at hems. Eleanor pressed on, her boots crunching against hard-packed snow, her cheeks stung raw, but her eyes burned with purpose. Inside the first cottage, the heat from a dying fire barely touched the frost on the window panes. The mother's hands trembled as she accepted the loaf of bread. Her children huddled close beneath a tattered quilt. Eleanor knelt to lay fresh kindling in the hearth, her breath forming ghosts in the air. "We'll come again tomorrow," she said softly, "if the path allows." Beatrice left a bottle of laudanum on the table. "Keep his chest warm," she said. "Wrap his feet in wool if you've any left." They moved from house to house, door to door, until the daylight thinned and the storm thickened. Snow fell like salt shaken from the sky. The wind roared now, merciless and furious, sweeping across the moors in violent gusts. Visibility shrank to feet, then to inches. "We should turn back," Beatrice called through her scarf. "The manor's near 2 miles off." "There's one more," Eleanor answered. "The Braithwaites, the child. We risk freezing before we reach them." "Then go," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I'll finish." Beatrice hesitated. Her breath came in puffs of steam. Then with a curse, she turned toward the path home. "If you're not behind me in 30 minutes, she growled, "I'll send the whole damned stable." Eleanor pressed onward. Nathaniel did not notice the hour until the wind rattled the study window and the fire fell to embers. He looked toward the corridor, wondering vaguely at the silence. No tea had been brought, no evening tray. He rang the bell once. No one came. In the hall he found a young maid, soaked from snow, hair matted, cheeks red. "My lord," she gasped. "They've gone. The Countess and Mrs. Hargrave. To the tenants." Before the storm hit, the brandy glass slipped from his hand. Within minutes, he was in the stables, barking orders, mounting his black gelding before the grooms could even fasten the second strap. Snow slapped against his face like open palms as he rode. The storm had swallowed the land. Landmarks vanished into white. His coat clung wet to his shoulders. His cravat was sodden, but none of it mattered. She was out there. She had gone without a word, without permission, without fear. And the thought of her, lost in that furious storm, turned something in him to fire. He rode harder. He reached the Braithwaite cottage just as the last light died. The roof was barely visible beneath the weight of snow, the windows iced over. He dismounted, staggered to the door. Inside, Eleanor sat on the cold stone floor, a child cradled in her lap beneath her cloak. The boy's skin was pale, his cough weak. Eleanor's cheeks were flushed from windburn, her lips blue at the corners, but her eyes, when they rose to meet his, were calm. "You came," she said. He stared at her, stunned. "Of course I did." She tried to rise, but her legs faltered. Nathaniel crossed the room and knelt, lifting the child gently into his arms, then helped Eleanor to her feet. "Can you walk?" "I'm not made of porcelain," she whispered. But when she stumbled, he caught her. Back at the manor, the fire in the drawing room burned high. Eleanor sat close to it, wrapped in quilts, her boots drying by the hearth. Nathaniel knelt beside her, drying her hair with a linen cloth. His hands moved gently, the silence between them filled only by the crackle of flame. "You could have died," he said. She looked at him, her eyes soft. So could they. His hands stilled. For a long moment neither spoke. The shadows danced along the walls, and the storm outside battered the windows like 1,000 grieving fists. At last, Nathaniel spoke, his voice low. "When I was younger, I believed in love. Foolishly, perhaps. I gave my heart to someone who knew how to use it, then toss it aside." Her gaze did not waver. "She told me I was everything she wanted," he continued, "but she wanted more. A title, a fortune, an alliance. I was just a stepping stone." Eleanor did not need to ask the name. She already knew. "I swore I would never feel again," he said, "that I would never let another person possess that part of me." Her hand, hidden beneath the quilt, moved, just slightly, and touched his. Not a caress, a reassurance. "I don't want to possess you," she said, "only to understand." The fire popped. He looked down at their hands, her fingers resting gently atop his. Her skin was cool, his palm trembled, neither pulled away. Not yet. They did not kiss. They did not speak again. But in that silence something shifted. A fragile warmth, tentative but alive, growing like embers in the ashes of fear. And though they sat apart, the space between them had never been closer. The storm passed, but left behind a world stripped bare. The snow upon the moors no longer danced with fury, but lay frozen in stillness, like secrets buried beneath white silk. Days stretched quietly in Hargrave Manor, and though the air no longer howled, something else did. in silence, in memory, in the cracks of the house that no fire could quite warm. Beatrice Hargrave, as always, rose before the servants stirred. She lit her own candle and tied her shawl tightly, though the hearths were all ablaze. Some chills were not of temperature. On that particular morning, she made her way to the north wing, a corridor long untouched since Lady Helena's death. The air there held the scent of time, dry wood, forgotten perfume, the faint sweetness of faded parchment. Cobwebs laced the corners like frost. She entered the last door on the left, a narrow room once used for seasonal linens. It had not been opened in years. "I need more than memory," she whispered to herself. The light from her candle flickered across the dust-covered shelves as she pulled open the lower drawers. One resisted. She pulled again, harder. Something within cracked free. Inside were letters, dozens, perhaps more. Some were still folded with wax seals, unbroken. Others were crumpled, their edges singed as if someone had tried to burn them, but failed to follow through. The ink on many had faded, but the hand that wrote them had not changed. Nathaniel's script was unmistakable. She drew one out and began to read. The words bled with youth, hope, and the delicate ache of a man in love. Letters never sent, promises never fulfilled. And none of them addressed to Margaret. Her hands trembled. Beneath the pile, she found an envelope tied with a familiar violet ribbon. Its seal had been sliced. The date was from nearly a decade earlier, Lady Margaret Ashcombe, so they had been intercepted, suppressed, hidden deliberately. Beatrice's mouth tightened. She thought back, small oddities, misplaced keys, Alderton's access to every room, his long allegiance to Margaret's family before Nathaniel's inheritance. She had not connected it then. Now it bloomed like poison beneath her ribs. She gathered the letters with care, bundling them in cloth and tucking them beneath her arm. As she stood to leave, her eyes caught the glint of something tucked deep in the drawer's recess, a folded document, heavier paper, bound with legal ribbon. Beatrice's breath stopped. She sat slowly and opened the contract. It was Eleanor's marriage settlement. She read every line, every clause, her lips tightening more with each one. Among the stipulations was one cruel paragraph, buried near the end, clearly inserted to go unnoticed. The bride shall make no claim, present or future, upon the estate of Hargrave, nor shall she inherit, directly or indirectly, any portion of land, holdings or title thereof. Her union shall neither alter nor secure her father's debts in perpetuity, and any issue from this marriage shall be the sole legal responsibility of the husband. Beatrice closed her eyes. This was no alliance. It had been a transaction, a binding legal act of control. She rose in silence and made her way to Eleanor. The Countess was seated in the music room, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze turned toward the grey moors beyond the tall window. Her gown was pale, simple, without ornament. The fire at her back cast flickers of gold across her cheek, but her expression was unreadable. Beatrice placed the letter bundle and the contract upon the harpsichord. "I found them," she said softly. Eleanor turned. Her eyes moved to the papers. She said nothing. Beatrice spoke again, voice low. "They were hidden, torn, burned, forgotten, on purpose. Letters Nathaniel wrote years ago, and the contract you signed before the wedding. Read it if you choose, or don't. But know that what you feel, you are not wrong to feel it." Then she left. Eleanor stood only once the door had closed. She approached the papers slowly, as one might approach a grave. She touched the seal of the contract first. Her hand did not tremble. The words stared back at her, bold and unrepentant, every line sliced deeper than the last. There was no care for her security, no promise of trust, no respect for her name. Only control, only caution, only cruelty, dressed in formal language. And she had signed it, with her own hand, believing it an act of duty, of sacrifice. But it had not been noble. It had been a surrender, a silencing. She picked up the letters. The first bore Nathaniel's name. but it was the second that caught her breath. It was written to Eleanor's father, and in it Nathaniel expressed terms, short sentences, no emotion. The marriage is to be immediate. Your daughter shall be treated with decency. Her education and appearance are sufficient. Her silence is assumed. She closed the letter. Her heart did not shatter, not fully, but a long, deep crack opened, one that would not easily heal. That evening, she did not dine. Nathaniel, seated alone in the long dining hall, noticed her absence. The fire at his side warmed nothing. The servants moved quietly. The silence pressed against him. He rose from the table and made his way to the music room. The door was ajar. She sat at the harpsichord, the letters gone, the fire reduced to a whisper of light. Her hands rested on her lap. Her face was composed. "You're unwell?" he asked softly. She turned. Her expression held no accusation, but neither did it hold warmth. "I am learning," she said. "Learning what? What silence costs, and what it hides." He did not know what to say. His instinct, always, was to guard, to protect. But in her eyes, he saw something steadier than pain. Resolve. He stepped into the room. "You went out into a storm to save a child. You signed a contract to cage a woman," she replied. The room pulsed with quiet. "I thought it was protection," he said, and his voice, for the first time in days, cracked. Her breath caught, but she did not interrupt. "I thought," he continued, "if I made it clean, unfeeling, without entanglement, no one would bleed, least of all me." She stood. He took a step closer. "But I see now," she whispered, "that love is not the danger. It is the absence of it that ruins us." He looked at her then, really looked, and realized what he was losing. But she did not flee. She did not cry. She only turned toward the window, her profile carved in light and shadow. And though he remained in the room, he felt as if he was standing behind glass, watching a fire he could not touch. Not yet. The winter deepened, pressing its fingers into every crack of Hargrave Manor. Though the fires remained lit and servants moved swiftly through stone corridors, there was a chill that refused to leave, a silence not born of snow, but of things unspoken. Nathaniel stood in the steward's office, tall and grim beneath the oil portrait of his grandfather. Mr. Alderton sat stiffly behind the desk, his hands folded tightly, the edge of his ledger smeared with fresh ink. "You intercepted my letters," Nathaniel said, his voice low but clear. "You burned them. You betrayed your post." Alderton did not flinch. His lips curled into something faintly resembling amusement. "I did what was necessary," he answered. "For the house. For your future." Nathaniel stepped closer. "You manipulated my life. I protected it. You served Margaret. She offered clarity. You offered sentiment." Alderton leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "And now you've shackled yourself to a woman with no name, no wealth, no claim. A girl who played the innocent and caught you when you were at your weakest." Nathaniel's hand clenched. "Take care, Alderton." "Oh, come now, my lord." The steward smiled coldly. "Do you truly believe she didn't know what she was doing? The humble eyes, the trembling voice, the nobility cloaked in simplicity. A masterstroke. I've seen actresses who couldn't perform so convincingly." Nathaniel's fist struck the desk, scattering papers. Alderton jolted back, but recovered quickly. "If you dismiss me, the truth will echo through every estate in the county. The marriage was arranged, bought, bargained for. Who do you think they'll blame? The girl, or the count who desired her in shadows and made her his bride in ink?" Nathaniel stared at him, chest rising, blood cold. "You will leave," he said quietly. "Tonight. Do not speak to anyone. Do not take a carriage. You will walk out the same way you came in, alone." And Alderton, realizing the line had been crossed, gathered his coat and his ledgers and vanished into the snow without a backward glance. But the damage had already spread, like rot beneath the floorboards. That afternoon, a letter arrived on thick ivory paper, its seal marked with the Ashcombe crest. Nathaniel recognized the elegant, venomous hand at once. "We should speak alone." The world is changing, and you are far too clever to be left behind. He found her waiting at the Peacock Salon in York, reclining in a velvet armchair as though no time had passed. She wore emerald green, her neck bare save for a long strand of pearls that glinted with each movement. Her eyes lit with something between satisfaction and nostalgia when she saw him. "My dearest," she breathed, rising only enough to press a kiss near his cheek. Still as brooding as ever. "I was afraid marriage might ruin you." He did not sit. "What do you want, Margaret?" She smiled. "To help." "I doubt that." She poured herself tea slowly, as though savoring the game. "Your steward's gone," she said casually. "Disgraced. There will be rumors, unkind ones. And your little bride, delicate as she may appear, will be devoured by them, unless you act. Speak plainly." Margaret set her cup down with a soft click. "Annul the marriage, quietly. Send her to your country estate or a retreat in Bath. I'll arrange everything. In return, I will secure your re-entry into Parliament, fund your campaign, and offer the endorsement of the Marquis of Halberton. You'll have power again, Nathaniel, the kind that lasts. And in exchange," she smiled, "your name, at last." Nathaniel looked at her, really looked. The same mouth that had once whispered love like poetry now spoke deals like contracts. The same eyes that had once drawn him in now looked like mirrors, empty of reflection. "I see," he said. "You don't have to love me," she continued. "You never did. But you did belong to me, and I am tired of pretending otherwise." Nathaniel turned and left without another word. That night, back at Hargrave Manor, he returned late and said nothing. Eleanor had not waited for him. Her room was dark but not empty. She sat by the fire, knitting blankets for the tenant families. Her sleeves were rolled, her face calm, but her eyes were distant. She had seen the carriage leave with Alderton. She had heard whispers of the letter from Lady Margaret, and Nathaniel's silence spoke volumes. He stood at the doorway and watched her. She did not look up. "I dismissed Alderton," he said finally. "There were betrayals I can no longer tolerate." She nodded, still working the yarn between her fingers. "I saw Margaret today." That made her pause. She offered an annulment. Her hand stilled. "I refused it," he added. Still, she did not look at him. "I see," she murmured. But her voice was tight, as though she had swallowed something sharp and unspoken. Nathaniel stepped closer. "Eleanor, you needn't explain," she said, rising. "Whatever bargain you made with my father, whatever shame you carry from your past, I understand. What I do not understand is why you choose silence over truth, why you speak to her but not to me." He took a breath, but the words would not come. She gave him a long look, measured, steady, not cruel. "I will not be an ornament," she said, "nor a sacrifice." And she left him standing in the firelight. The following morning, Eleanor began her own campaign, not one of pride, but of purpose. With Beatrice at her side, she walked the grounds, visited the workers' cottages, and took notes in a leather-bound book. She met with the local vicar to discuss schooling for the children. She spoke with the stable boys about safe passage through the frozen wood. And most notably, she entered the old chapel, abandoned for years, and began planning its restoration. The walls were crumbling, the windows broken, but the space held memory, possibility, and peace. Eleanor stood in the nave with sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, directing workers with quiet command. When the mason asked who would fund the repairs, she answered, "The Countess will see to it, and if the Count objects, he may speak to me directly." News spread through the estate like fire on dry grass, and Nathaniel, watching from the window of his study, saw a woman not defeated, but rising, not mourning, but building. He had tried to protect her by holding back the truth, but what she needed was not his protection. What she needed was his honesty, and he did not yet know how to give it. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the library, Beatrice gathered ledgers, receipts, signatures. Records of land transfers, some forged, some altered, many connected by one thread. Margaret Ashcombe. She worked by candlelight, her hands firm, her eyes sharp. She said nothing, but every page she turned was a promise. This house would no longer belong to secrets, and Eleanor, though wounded, would not be unarmed. The night began like any other in late February, still windless and unnaturally quiet. The moon hovered low over the Yorkshire moors, a pale coin half hidden by drifting cloud, casting the landscape in shadows that swayed with unease. A strange tension hung in the air, thick as the scent of peat smoke. Inside Hargrave Manor, Eleanor stood in the old chapel, sleeves rolled to her elbows, studying a hand-drawn sketch spread across the altar. Scaffolding had already begun to climb the outer walls. The stained glass windows, long shattered by time and neglect, had been measured and documented. Every stone she touched, every nail she marked for repair, bound her more deeply to the land, to the people, and to herself. When the scream pierced the stillness, it came not from the manor, but from the village beyond the trees. A child's voice, then a second, then the unmistakable sound of panic, dozens of footsteps running toward danger, not away from it. Eleanor dropped the ledger. Within moments, she was out the door and into the cold night, her cloak barely fastened, her boots slipping on the frozen path. The scent hit her before she reached the slope, the acrid, unmistakable reek of smoke, not from hearths or cooking fires, but from open flame, wild, angry, consuming. The tenant cottages. She did not hesitate. By the time she reached the first row of homes, flames had already swallowed the side wall of the Hammond cottage. A roof beam crackled and fell in a shower of sparks. Horses reared against their reins in the stables. Chickens clucked madly from overturned crates. The wind, so still only moments ago, had risen with purpose, feeding the fire, scattering embers across the brush like seeds of destruction. Men were shouting. A bucket line had formed from the frozen well, but the water turned to slush before it reached the blaze. Women screamed names into the smoke. Someone sobbed near the hedge. Children darted in and out of view, some barefoot in the snow. "Eleanor!" Beatrice's voice broke through the chaos. "You must go back." "No," Eleanor said, already pulling her cloak over her nose. "There are people inside. There are flames inside. All the more reason." And before Beatrice could stop her, Eleanor plunged into the burning doorway. The heat punched her in the face like a closed fist. Inside, the smoke twisted through the narrow hall like a living thing. The walls, once whitewashed, glowed orange in the inferno. She dropped to her knees and crawled through the thick air, calling out, "Is anyone here? Can you hear me?" A cough, then a cry. She followed the sound, nearly blind, her palms scraped from the floorboards, her lungs screaming. At last she found them, a boy no older than 10, clutching his little sister beneath a smouldering quilt in the corner. Her tiny face was streaked with soot, her curls damp with sweat. "Come," Eleanor gasped. "We must go now." The boy hesitated. "Papa said never to leave until—" "I'm your countess," she said, firm and gentle, "and I say you must trust me." He blinked once, then nodded. She wrapped the little girl in her cloak and lifted her into her arms. The boy followed, coughing. Together they moved back through the heat, stumbling toward the failing light of the door. Outside, a roar of voices swelled as they emerged. Then silence. For a heartbeat, the entire village froze. There she stood, Eleanor Whitfield Hargrave, wrapped in firelight, eyes fierce, holding a coughing child against her chest with one arm, the other guiding her brother from smoke to safety. Her hair clung in damp strands to her cheek. Her skirts were singed. Her voice, when she spoke, was raw but steady. "They need water and blankets. Now." The villagers surged into action. Nathaniel arrived moments later, his horse lathered and heaving. His coat was half-buttoned, his cravat askew, boots muddy from the moor. He slid from the saddle before the animal stopped moving and ran toward the flames. He caught sight of Eleanor at once, bruised, blackened, alive. Their eyes met through the smoke, and for the first time since their union, Nathaniel felt something shift, not just in his chest, but in the air between them. Without hesitation, he dove into the burning stables. He emerged minutes later carrying 2 children, one limp over each shoulder, his back blistered from embers, his face streaked with soot. He placed them gently into the arms of waiting mothers, then turned to Eleanor as though nothing else in the world existed. She crossed to him, still clutching the little girl, their hands brushed. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The fire raged until dawn. It took 2 cottages and the western edge of the stables, but not a single life was lost. When the embers finally died, the villagers gathered near the well, exhausted, wet and shivering, and someone, no one remembers exactly who, said aloud what others had begun to whisper. "She's no vicar's daughter now. She's one of us." At the manor, Beatrice sat in the study, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, Alderton's abandoned satchel open before her. He had vanished during the fire, leaving no note, no goodbye. Inside the bag were ledgers, notes, receipts, pages of transfers marked with the seal of Lady Margaret Ashcombe, transactions made in secret, land purchases masked through straw names, and beneath it all, a slim volume bound in red leather, a diary, forged, written in a script meant to resemble Eleanor's, imperfectly. Beatrice's fingers curled around it, her jaw tightening. She had known ambition. She had seen vanity. But this was treason of the soul. She rose slowly and placed the evidence into a locked drawer. The Count would need to see it, but not yet. Let him have this moment, the fire behind them, the night at their backs, and Eleanor in the eyes of the people, not as a stranger or a pawn, but as a woman born to lead. As dawn rose pale and uncertain, Nathaniel stood in the doorway of the rebuilt chapel. His shirt was open at the collar, his hands still blackened from ash. Eleanor entered slowly, the hem of her dress dragging across the floor like breath. "You risked your life," he said. "So did you. I had no choice." "Neither did I." They stood face to face, the silence between them thick with all they had not said. Then softly he spoke. "I see you now." Her eyes glistened, not from tears, but from the exhaustion of truth finally acknowledged. "Do you?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "and I'm not sure I deserve it." She looked at him long and full. "Then earn it." And with that, she turned and walked into the rising light, her silhouette framed by the shattered chapel window, where the first sunbeam of the day broke through the glass and fell upon her like a crown. London, spring of 1813. The city greeted them not with warmth, but with whispers. The streets shimmered with late frost, and the air clung to every stone facade like smoke, thick with rumor and judgment. Argrave House, their residence in Mayfair, had been opened after years sealed in silence. Servants scrubbed marble steps and lit candles in the long-closed drawing rooms, but the windows remained veiled as if the house itself preferred to hide. Nathaniel stood at the threshold as Eleanor crossed into the hall. Her traveling cloak was still dusted with road soot, her gloves creased at the wrists. She said nothing when the butler bowed. She simply climbed the stairs with quiet grace, her posture as regal as any queen, though her name echoed in every parlour and club as that of a usurper. The whispers had travelled faster than the coach wheels. The vicar's daughter who bewitched a count, the girl who set fire to her own estate for sympathy, the wife who kept a diary no proper woman would write. Nathaniel closed the door behind him and breathed deep. He had faced battlefields with steadier hands. A summons awaited them. The Court of Chancery had scheduled a hearing to address disputes raised by Margaret Ashcombe and her allies, cloaked in the language of concern, potential mismanagement of the Hargrave estate, questions of the marriage contract's legality, and, most insidious, questions about Eleanor's moral standing. The accusations were veiled, but the damage was sharp as glass. That evening, Nathaniel paced the library, while Beatrice sat at the great desk, her spectacles low on her nose as she turned each page of evidence like a blade. The forged diary had been published in whisper and ink. An anonymous pamphlet passed through salons, quoting Eleanor in sentences that dripped with false ambition, scandalous longing, and subtle scorn for the people of Hargrave. It was vile, written with enough restraint to be believable, yet laced with venom. "She wrote none of this," Nathaniel said, voice low. Beatrice met his gaze. "But they believe she did." He looked toward the window, jaw clenched. "Then I'll tell them the truth." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "She will." The morning of the hearing arrived grey and sharp. Fog crawled through Temple Gardens, shrouding the stone buildings in cold breath. Carriages lined the street outside the hall, horses restless, footmen tight-lipped. Inside the chamber, the crowd was thick. Nobles and landowners, creditors and councilmen, men in powdered wigs, women with gloved hands and sharp eyes. The judge, pale and severe, sat beneath a coat of arms and a ceiling that seemed to press downward with authority. Eleanor entered alone, dressed not in lace or jewels, but in a charcoal wool gown with a high collar and no adornment save for a single silver brooch, her mother's. Her hair was pinned in a crown of braids, her gloves were black, her face composed. The murmurs spread like a fever. Nathaniel sat beside her, silent. Margaret Ashcombe sat across the aisle, draped in amethyst silk, lips painted, chin raised like a victory flag. Beside her, her solicitor smiled faintly, holding the red leather diary in gloved hands. The trial began. Accusations came first, delivered in careful, civilized language. The diary was presented, the contract read aloud, Eleanor's social origins dissected. The tone was not cruel, it was worse. It was polite. The kind of cold that stripped skin more effectively than fire. Eleanor remained still. Then came Reverend Whitfield. He stood, aged but unbowed, in simple clerical dress. His voice trembled only once. "I signed the contract because I had no choice," he said. "My daughter sacrificed everything, not for gain, but for duty. I regret not fighting harder." He stepped down without looking at Margaret. Beatrice rose next. She carried a folio of documents, each bound and numbered. She laid out evidence of Alderton's transactions, land theft, forged signatures, bribes traced directly to Margaret's household. There was silence when she finished. Even the judge leaned forward. Then came the moment. "Does Lady Hargrave wish to speak?" All eyes turned to Eleanor. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate. The room seemed to still. "I was not born to this world," she began, her voice calm, clear. "I am the daughter of a village vicar. I grew up among books and breadlines, not ballrooms. I learned early that silence is easier than protest, that humility is safer than truth. But silence does not preserve dignity, and humility does not protect justice." She walked forward, her steps echoing. "I did not write that diary, but I know why it was written. Because a woman who is not from your world must either be small or be punished. I have been called ambitious, and I am. I wish to build, to heal, to lead. I wish to serve the land I now call mine. If that ambition frightens you, I suggest you fear the wrong thing." She turned to the judge. "I do not ask for your approval, only for truth." A breathless stillness followed. Then Nathaniel rose. He stood beside her, not ahead, not behind. "I am the one who signed that contract," he said. "I am the one who gave orders that hurt her. I am the one who feared love more than dishonor. Every failure is mine, not hers." He turned, scanning the room. "You question her worth? Then question me first, and know that whatever name I carry, it is she who taught me what honor truly is." The silence cracked. Someone coughed. Another shifted uncomfortably. But Margaret sat frozen, her smile gone, her eyes narrowed, a storm barely contained. The judge conferred with two advisors. Then finally, he spoke. "The court finds no evidence of mismanagement. The accusations are unsubstantiated. The diary is false. The estate remains in full standing. This hearing is concluded. The gavel struck. Eleanor bowed her head once. Margaret stood too quickly. She swept past them without a word, her skirts like thunder in the chamber. Outside, the sky had broken open. Rain fell, soft, clean, steady. Eleanor stood on the steps of the hall, breathing deeply, as if drawing in the first air in weeks. Nathaniel removed his coat and held it over her shoulders without a word. Their hands met beneath the fabric, quietly. No grand gesture, just touch. Behind them, people watched. But for once, they did not whisper. They nodded. Hargrave Manor was silent when they returned from London, but it was no longer cold. The stone halls no longer echoed with resentment or secrets, though the wind still crept along the windows and moaned at the corners, as if mourning the ghosts that once clung to its walls. Spring had begun to stir on the moors, tentative and pale, with crocuses pushing through the thawing earth and lambs crying faintly in distant pastures. Yet inside the drawing room, where Eleanor stood alone by the hearth, the air was heavy with anticipation, not of disaster, but of decision. The carriage ride from London had been marked by a silence thick with emotion. Not avoidance, no, they had shared looks full of meaning, touches brief but lingering. But something still hung between them, suspended like a question that had waited too long for an answer. Nathaniel entered quietly. He had shed the finery of court. His coat was of simple wool, dark and unadorned. The cravat at his throat had been loosened, and his hands bore smudges of ink, signs he had spent the morning poring over estate records, old tenant contracts and ledgers long neglected. But his eyes, those storm-dark eyes that once looked through her, now looked at her with something raw, something unguarded. He paused a few steps from her, as if unsure whether to speak or to flee. "I had the papers drawn up," he said at last. His voice was low but steady. "The annulment is signed, no contest. You would be free, your name, your dowry rights, your reputation restored in writing." Eleanor turned slowly to face him. Her gown was soft grey muslin, modest and unadorned, save for the small pearl brooch Beatrice had pinned there that morning. Her hair was loose at the nape, a few strands escaping the comb in a way that made her look younger, softer, and utterly resolute. "You would give me my freedom," she said. Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Yes. No strings." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No expectations," he replied. "No obligations. I will not be the chain that holds you. Not after what I've seen you survive, after what I've done." There it was, the confession, not of love, not yet, but of remorse, of awareness. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she stepped closer. "And what if I refuse?" she asked. Nathaniel blinked, startled. "Refuse?" "Yes," she said, stronger now. "What if I choose to stay, not as a prisoner, not as a wife of contract, but as myself, as a woman who sees your darkness and does not fear it because I carry my own?" His breath caught. "Then I would be humbled." "No," she said gently. "You would be loved." A silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy. It shimmered, delicate and alive like morning mist over the fields. "I do not want an annulment," she said. "I want a new agreement." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "I want a contract drawn not on paper, but in trust," she continued. "Terms not of possession, but of partnership. You and I, stewards of this place, of its people, of each other." He took a trembling step forward. "I do not deserve this. Neither did I deserve what was done to me," she replied. "Yet here we are." He stared at her, as if seeing her fully for the first time. Then, with a quiet exhale that seemed to release years of grief, he dropped to one knee, not as a man proposing, nor as a count performing ceremony, but as a soul laying itself bare. "I cannot undo the past," he said, "but I can promise this. I will not lead from pride again. I will not let silence speak for me, or fear rule this house. I kneel not as count to countess, but as man to woman, as Nathaniel to Eleanor." She reached out, and her fingers brushed his cheek. tenderly, reverently. A breathless moment passed between them. Then she took both his hands and drew him gently to his feet. "There will be no annulment," she said. "There will be a renewal." His eyes searched hers. You would take vows again." "Yes," she said, "but this time not alone. Not under duress, not in silence." They stood in the fading light, hand in hand, as a long shadow stretched across the floor and the fire crackled gently behind them. Later, in the quiet warmth of the library, they sat across a large oak table, quill and parchment between them. Eleanor's proposal, written in her neat, even script, outlined a new stewardship of Hargrave Manor. Equal votes in matters of tenant affairs, a fund for village schooling, including girls, a quarterly meeting with tenant leaders, winter coal allocations written into policy. Nathaniel read it with awe, the corners of his mouth twitching as her confidence shone in every line. "This is not a proposal," he murmured. "It's a revolution." She smiled softly. "So be it." Beatrice entered quietly, a tray of tea in her hands, and paused when she saw the pair bent over the parchment, their heads close, their postures easy. "Should I call the solicitor?" she asked with a knowing smile. "No," said Eleanor, her eyes never leaving Nathaniel's. "We'll write our own vows." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the moors and dusk cloaked the land in violet, Nathaniel walked alone into the old chapel. The scent of fresh lime wash still lingered. The pews, rebuilt by tenant hands, gleamed with beeswax. Candles had been placed along the altar rail, and a garland of early wildflowers hung across the pulpit. He stood at the front and closed his eyes. Here, in this place once hollowed by neglect and shame, he could feel it now, something sacred returning, not just faith, but belonging. Behind him he heard the faint creak of the chapel door. He turned. Eleanor stepped inside, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze was everything unspoken. Forgiveness, hope, the beginning of a life not built on convenience, but on choice. "Shall we invite the village?" she asked. He smiled. "Every last soul." They stood side by side in the chapel's quiet, already married by law, but not yet by heart. That would come, and when it did, it would not be whispered. It would be witnessed by the people, by the land, by love itself. Spring unfurled over Yorkshire with rare generosity, painting the moors in strokes of gold and green. The air was brisk, kissed with dew, but the sun broke through the clouds as if summoned by something sacred. Hargrave Manor stood transformed. The ivy along its stone face was no longer overgrown, but trimmed with care. The windows gleamed. The front garden, once wild and neglected, bloomed with crocuses and wild primroses, planted by tenant children under Eleanor's instruction. But it was the chapel that drew every gaze that morning. It had been a hushed place once, cold, abandoned, a relic of faded piety. Now it stood open, alive, fragrant with beeswax, wood polish, and wildflowers. Villagers and gentry alike arrived early, some on foot, some by cart, a few in polished carriages. What had once been whispered about as scandal was now awaited with reverence. Eleanor stood within the old vicarage one last time, her hands calm, her breath steady. Her gown was not white, but a soft ivory muslin trimmed with pale blue ribbon. Her hair was gathered at the crown, half pinned, half flowing freely down her back, adorned with sprigs of hawthorn. At her throat hung a simple pendant, her mother's, fastened with a silken blue ribbon. There were no jewels, no veil, no pretenses. Beatrice approached quietly and took her hand. "I never thought I'd see the day this house would know joy again," the older woman whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Eleanor turned to her. "You were its heart long before I arrived." Beatrice gave a soft laugh, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Perhaps, but it needed a new fire, my dear. And you came burning." Outside, the bells tolled. The chapel's wooden doors stood open. Flowers lined the aisle, simple bunches tied with twine. At the front, Reverend Whitfield stood composed. the Bible open in his hands, the wind lifting the edge of his robe. Nathaniel waited there, his silhouette tall and sure. His coat was midnight blue, his cravat snow white, his eyes searching the crowd with a quiet urgency until they found her. He had never looked at her like this before. Not with fear, not with guilt, not even with love restrained, but with reverence, as if the world had turned and she had become its axis. Eleanor stepped through the threshold. A hush fell. Children stood on tiptoe to see her pass. Farmers doffed their caps. Gentry bowed their heads, and in the front pew, Beatrice clasped her hands, her gaze shining with pride. Each step Eleanor took was deliberate, not hurried, not hesitant. She was not being given away. She was walking towards something she had chosen, something she had built, something she had earned. Nathaniel extended his hand. She took it. Reverend Whitfield began, his voice steady and deep, but Eleanor barely heard the words. She felt only the pulse of Nathaniel's thumb against her wrist, the scent of candle wax and heather, the warmth of sunlight streaming through the stained glass onto their joined hands. The vows were simple, clear, spoken from the soul. Nathaniel's voice did not waver. I promise to build with you, to listen, to lead, to follow, to fall and rise again beside you, not as your lord, but as your equal, your friend, your fiercest defender. Eleanor's voice was soft, but every word rang true. I promise to meet you not with silence, but with truth, to walk beside you when the path is easy, and when it demands everything. There was no kiss demanded by ritual, but Nathaniel bent, gently pressed his forehead to hers, and the world fell away. The chapel erupted in applause, stumbling at first, then fierce. And in the back corner, unnoticed by many, but not by Eleanor, a cloaked figure turned quietly away and slipped out the side door. Lady Margaret Ashcombe would not be missed. Her fall had been quiet, but complete. The forged diary exposed, the stolen funds traced, her ties to Alderton's bribes confirmed by Beatrice's ledger and testimony. Her allies had withdrawn like shadows at noon. Even her own brother had cut her from the family accounts. She left England under the guise of illness, bound for the continent, her name stained, her power dissolved. But Eleanor gave no thought to Margaret now. After the ceremony, the manor opened its doors wide. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, honeyed pears, and wine gifted by tenant families. Laughter rang through halls that had once known only silence. Children played on the lawn, musicians played reels and ballads by the hearth, and no one was turned away. Nathaniel slipped from the crowd only once. He found Eleanor in the study, her shawl draped over one shoulder, reviewing the final tenant contracts they had drafted together. "You're working," he said, amused. "I'm finishing," she corrected, "so we can begin." He approached, took the parchment from her hand, and set it aside. "Then let us begin properly." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring, his signet, once a symbol of rank and restraint. With quiet care, he untied the blue ribbon that held her pendant. Then, with steady hands, he threaded the ring onto the ribbon and tied it again, the metal resting just below the locket near her heart. "I bind this not to claim you," he said, "but to remind myself every day that love is not held in name or title, but in what we build." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I have no dowry," she whispered. He smiled. "You gave me something far greater." Later, when the guests had gone and the fires burned low, they stepped outside. Just the two of them. The moor stretched before them, wild and eternal. Larks rose overhead, their wings flashing against the twilight. Nathaniel took Eleanor's hand. She looked at him, not with hope nor with fear, but with certainty, and then he kissed her, not in secrecy, not in shadow, but beneath the open sky, where wind and wildflowers bore witness. A kiss not of longing but of promise, not of possession but of devotion. In that moment, Hargrave Manor ceased to be a place ruled by ghosts. It became a home. Their story, born of silence, fire and defiance, was no longer one of survival. It was a legacy. And it began anew on the moor, with the woman who had refused to break and the man who had finally learned how to kneel. The moors had bloomed early that year. Patches of golden gorse brushed against the soft wind, and skylarks darted in and out of the heather, their song familiar now like an old lullaby. The air still carried that damp sweetness that clung to Yorkshire's high hills. But Hargrave Manor no longer stood aloof against the sky like some stone fortress. It breathed. Children's laughter echoed across the green. From the upper window of the solar, Eleanor Hargrave, Countess by name, but mother, teacher, steward, and friend by every action, watched as her two sons ran down the sloped path toward the brook. Robert, 7, all knees and dirt-smudged cheekbones, chased his younger brother Thomas, who clutched a wooden sailboat carved by their father. A governess followed at a respectful distance, but Eleanor did not worry. The land knew her boys, and they knew it in return. She turned from the window, smoothing the front of her soft wool daydress. Time had deepened the grace in her features. There were silver threads beginning at her temples now, and the faintest lines near her mouth, the kind drawn by years of both joy and endurance. She wore them with the same quiet pride she once wore her simple wedding pendant, still bound with the same blue ribbon. Nathaniel had never replaced it with anything grander. Downstairs, the chapel bell rang, a soft reminder of the hour, but it was not rung for mass or ceremony. It rang now every morning as a call to the village school, the very one Eleanor had fought to build. Education for girls had begun as a bold experiment. Now it was a tradition. Her name was spoken with respect in council meetings and harvest festivals, not because she demanded it, but because she'd earned it. She descended the wide staircase, tracing her fingers along the polished rail, and paused at the landing. There, nestled in the gallery wall, hung a new portrait. It depicted the family beneath a flowering apple tree. Nathaniel seated with a book in his lap, Eleanor beside him, arms around their sons. Even Beatrice had been convinced to sit for it, her white hair pinned in its usual crown, her eyes sharp despite the soft smile that rarely left her face now. Beatrice had never remarried nor left the manor. She was family. At the base of the stairs, Nathaniel awaited, dressed in his working coat, sleeves already rolled. He had changed more than any man she had ever known, not in appearance, though his beard now bore streaks of silver and his hands showed the wear of years, but in heart. Gone was the withdrawn count of old. This was a man who knelt in gardens to plant bulbs with village children, a man who read to widows on rainy days, a man who, when he kissed Eleanor's hand each night before bed, did so with the same reverence as he had 8 years before, only now with the certainty of love that had endured. "You're late," he teased gently, offering his arm. "I was remembering," she replied, taking it. They walked together to the courtyard, where carriages had begun to arrive for the spring fete, an annual tradition they had revived in the manor's name. Music floated in from the village green, and ribbons waved in the breeze. Among the guests stood Reverend Whitfield, older now, but still upright. He held a small girl by the hand, his granddaughter, the first in the family line to be named Eleanor. The Reverend had long since reconciled with his daughter, and though time had carved new regrets into his face, he had become a gentler man, softened by watching the very woman he once bargained away become the region's fiercest light. Lady Margaret Ashcombe's name had not been spoken in years. Whispers said she lingered in Florence, or perhaps Paris, living off dwindling family estates. Her fortune had vanished. Her allies had moved on. Occasionally, Eleanor received unsigned correspondence with handwriting she recognized, letters not of apology, but of longing. She never replied. Some debts were not hers to repay, but not all shadows remained. Last autumn, young Thomas Hargrave, Nathaniel's estranged cousin, had returned from the Americas, seeking forgiveness and a future. Eleanor had insisted the boy be given a post at the estate. Now he served as junior steward under Beatrice's strict but fair mentorship, learning not only ledgers and land management, but integrity. As the fete began in earnest, Eleanor found herself surrounded by a sea of villagers and visitors. There were girls reading aloud beneath trees, mothers nursing infants without shame, boys helping elders lift baskets of preserves. The manor no longer ruled by fear, but reborn through community. It was Nathaniel who called for silence just before sunset. He stood upon the chapel steps, Eleanor beside him, and held up a simple scroll, new land agreements that ensured protections for tenants for years to come. But it was Eleanor who spoke. This land has survived war, winter, scandal and silence, but it has never known what it knows now, the sound of every voice being heard. A cheer rose, thunderous and joyful. Later, when the lanterns had been lit and the last song played, Eleanor and Nathaniel walked out to the moor once more. The stars had bloomed just as the heather had, bold and unafraid. "I never imagined this life," Nathaniel said, voice low. "Not even when I dared to hope." Eleanor took his hand, pressing her forehead to his, just as they had on the day of their renewal. "You didn't imagine it," she whispered. "We built it." And in that quiet space, where truth had once been buried by snow and silence, their love remained, a fire not dimmed, but deepened by time, forever bound not by the contract of account, but by the vow of a man and a woman who had once been strangers in a chapel, and now stood together, soul-bound on the moor, a legacy of fire, of choice, of love. What a journey! Eleanor's story is not just a tale of love, it is a reminder that strength is quiet, that dignity does not depend on status, and that true transformation begins when we choose truth over pride and love over fear. Through fire, betrayal and silence, Eleanor built not just a home, but a legacy. She was not saved by a nobleman. She saved herself, and in doing so, helped heal a broken man, a forgotten estate, and a fractured community. Maybe her story reminded you of something you've lived, or maybe it gave you hope for what's still to come. If you made it this far, leave the word reborn in the comments. It will be our quiet little signal that you stayed until the very end, heart and soul. We read every message. Your words matter more than you know. And if you'd like to help us keep telling these stories, the ones that stir something deep, that make us feel and remember, you can leave a super thanks with any amount that feels right to you. It's a beautiful way to support the writers, editors, narrators and dreamers behind this channel. But if that's not possible right now, don't worry. There's another powerful way to help. Share this story. Send it to a friend, a sister, a daughter, a mother. You never know who might need these words today. And if your heart is still stirred, don't miss the other unforgettable romances I've left in the cards and end screen. Each one is waiting to sweep you away. From all of us at Period Romances, thank you. We are so grateful you're here. Until next time, keep believing in stories that heal and in love that dares to rise from the ashes.